Ready when you are.
Cool. So mine's leader's Tippet for Belize. Kind of zoom back to rods and reels. Pairing your line with your reel. Backing should all be 20 to 30 pound. It can be gel spun or Dacron or braid or whatever you want to use, but make sure you go and you have the capacities right. That is going to line up well with the different lines. And you basically, 8-weight rod, 8-weight line, floating for your 8s and your 9s. That's what you're going to want to use. You're not really using sinking stuff for your bonefishing permit. Different companies have different tapers for their different lines. Scientific Anglers, they have an infinity, they've got a big water, they've got a grand slam taper. Basically that's going to kind of dictate how it lays out. And that is going to vary the flies that you're casting, how you cast, how you like the cast to feel, the rod that you're using. So there's a lot that goes into it. I personally like the infinity taper. It's a little bit longer taper for my bonefish and permit setups. It's those situations you're typically fishing a little bit smaller flies, a little bit lighter flies. If you're in really shallow water, up on the reef with fish that are in 1.5 foot of water, having a big heavy front of the line is not going to be as delicate as an infinity taper. So like a grand slam taper would be meant more for your tarpon, maybe really heavy permit crabs, but typically bigger flies and less technical presentations. So that's going to be bonefish and permit. Moving up into your 10 weights, 11 weight, 12 weight, having something that's going to turn over a bigger fly, a heavier fly, more of a fly. Having kind of a little bit more front-loaded taper is going to do that better. So that's where I like Scientific Anglers, Grand Slam. Rio makes a good one. Cortland makes a good one. Lots of really good lines out there. They all have their pluses and minuses and how they pair differently with different rods. Personally, I like the Scientific Angler stuff, and I have for a long time. As you get into the higher weights, so you've got your 10, which is, kind of medium tarpon, snook, that type of stuff. Once you start getting a little bit bigger, your 11s and your 12s, maybe you're fishing deeper water, bigger fish, migratory fish that maybe, out away from the flats or out from the reef. And then you're going to want to have, an intermediate line, so Grand Slam clear tip with a little bit of a sink to it. But basically just having something that's going to get the fly into the deeper in the water column. Most of what we do down in Belize is going to be with a floating line. But if you are down there and you are targeting large tarpon, for instance, or you're fishing up in the river mouths or estuaries, top water, close to top water, is great, but it may not be the most effective. So having a spare spool to run a line on, that you can have your floating line for when you're on the flats, as well as a intermediate or even a full sink line, can be really beneficial for the tarpon fishermen. As you definitely want one line per reel or spool as you're bringing them down. Definitely not a bad idea to have an extra one or two, especially if you're in southern Belize or at Turniff, or even just I guess even southern northern Belize, so basically anywhere in Belize. You could run into a situation where a line breaks. It could wrap around a dock piling. It could get cut on the reef. You could be not paying attention and it drags behind and gets caught in the boat motor. Any situation like that, having an extra line or two is not a bad idea. I'm typically bringing, probably an extra 9 and 10. The heavier weights is more likely where you're going to have that situation come to play. Bigger fish, permit close to the reef. If you're somewhere in the permit alley zone between Dangriga and Placencia or out at the Turniff Atoll. So having a backup is always good. A lot of the lodges in Belize do have small shops, or the guides have extra stuff, but being prepared for anything really goes a long way. And we can kind of go into it a little bit later, but having extras that can go in addition to money for a gratuity. If you have an extra line, giving that to the guide at the end of it, they're going to be really excited about that, because it's hard to get stuff down there. So anytime you have extras that you don't mind leaving, lines and leaders and tippet and all that stuff's always good stuff. Leaders and leader material. Generally, you're going to be running, between an 8 and a 20-pound leader for, bonefish up to permit. Fluorocarbon for sure. Most of the guides down there, we're starting to see they like you coming down with, pre-tied leaders. They don't like having a bunch of knots. It's nice to make your own leader, and there's different formulas you can play around with to build them out, and that's great. But if you're fishing in a lot of turtle grass or coral, it's each knot is something that can get caught on something. So a lot of those guys, they'd much rather tie a little bit of tippet on to a pre-made leader, or what I like to do sometimes is even run a heavier butt section from the fly line, 4 or 5 feet, and then connecting that kind of reverse from what you would have done with a trout leader, where you tie tippet onto the end. You're basically going from the fly line section to the butt section of the leader, and increasing the length of it that way. So different ways you can do it, but definitely 8, 10, 12, 20, 16, those are the leaders that you're going to want. Everything should be at least 9 feet. More often than not, having something 10 feet or 12 feet, or building off of it so that you're fishing a little bit longer stuff for fish that can be spooky in situations. With leader material, I like to bring down the kitchen sink, but basically you're on 40, 60, 30, basically everything you would need to build a leader. So if you ran out of these, or you had your bag open and it flipped out of the boat, or anything that could happen, having extras that you can build stuff off to is always good. Definitely not a full necessity, but I think it really does help. If you're tarpon fishing and you're like, oh, we need to add some more bite, well, here's some 60-pound bite that we can run off the edge. So big stuff. This is going to be a mix of monofilament and fluorocarbon. Anything to the fly itself should be fluorocarbon. If you're building the leader out, using some mono there, towards the butt section is just fine. With tippet, similar to the leaders, you're going to have 8 to 20 pound. There's all sorts of good stuff out there. It's all fluorocarbon that I like to use. Umpqua's doing some cool stuff with pink that they've pulled from the kind of the offshore crowd. SA's got some great spools that all click together. It definitely helps keep yourself organized if they do click together. So you don't have loose stuff floating all over, but definitely 8, 10, 12, 16, 20. You could go up to having a roll of 25, and you can get it kind of in this little bit more modest spool, or something a little 25 does come in the big big spools as well. With tarpon leaders in Belize, they do make pre-made ones, which are great. Kind of to read the number there, so it's going to be 12 feet. That 80 pound is the bite tippet. So that's what's connected to the fly. That's the last little bit. Tarpon have sharp gill plates and mouths and stuff like that, and they're shaking their heads around. So you want to have a heavier gauge down to the fly to keep that fly on. That next number, that's called the class tippet, and that's going to be between your bite and the butt section of the leader. That's basically the breaking strength. So this one's 30 pounds with an 80 pound bite. This one's also 30 with a 60 pound. That 30 is really important for a lot of different reasons. 30, 20, 25 even. A lot of times guys down there, they want to use just straight 80 pound or straight 60 pound. And we kind of touched on this before, but that can cause other problems. If it wraps around something, it can break reel handles, it can break rods, it can break fingers and toes. If you are stepped in between the line and fish goes running off and you've got that wrapped around, it can pull you out of the boat. So I think that it's really important to have a class tippet that is breakable. And probably 30 is about as high as I would go, just because you start looking at fly lines and what the core strength of a fly line is. Most of the stuff that we're going to be using is going to be 30 or 40 pounds. So if the leader that you're using is straight 80 pound, well, you're not breaking the leader, you're breaking the fly line. And when fly lines cost $130 versus a roll of leader material that's $30 or whatever it may be, and comes in a 50-meter spool, I'd rather be having to tie that back on than digging into the bag or the guide's bag or your buddy's bag for an extra fly line, because if your fly line's broken, that's kind of a day ender. Other stuff that you can bring, wire, 30, 40 pound, for barracuda, or even, some snapper, stuff like that, or you can get, full on metal wire, if you want to go after sharks or, kind of anything, out of the ordinary. But, having something like that is good to have, in the bag. So if you were, having a slow day, the weather's off, and it's like, hey, let's go find some barracuda. One, they're a really fun species, but you want to be prepared. So having, knottable wire is kind of, my favorite, but you could use, full on steel and do that if you wanted to do it too. Yeah. So, a couple other things, definitely not necessities, but definitely helpful. Pair of pliers to have down there. All the guides, can change flies and tie knots for you, but, if you're able to, and you like to do it, having decent pair of pliers is a good thing to have. It's definitely got to go in checked bags. They will not make it through TSA, but everything from trimming line, pulling hooks out, some of them have bottle openers, just basic set of tools. These are Able pliers. They've been great. Some more basic kind of hardware store. These are Manly pliers, or Bass Pro Shops, or whatever else. Little set of pliers can be nice to have, just as you're working through stuff on the boat, or around the lodge if you needed a little set of tools.